million left. There's, 10 provinces and 3 territories, or is it 3 territories now?
It's 3 territories now, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yukon, Northwest Territory, and none of it.
That's right, none of it. If you divided it up evenly on a per capita basis, you could certainly go a long way to alleviating a lot of the provincial debt, or at least start to put a dent in that. And that's only 1 year, Joseph. That's only 1 year you could do that.
Right.
Well, it's going to be a long, cold day down below before we ever see a balanced budget and no debt, or a very limited controllable debt.
Sure, but the thing I think that most Canadians don't appreciate, when we talk about numbers, everybody gets excited about the numbers, and they're pretty grim right now. But I think, again, to put it into perspective, you have to look at what it actually costs every year. Just think of it this way, that is lost money. That's money that's going into just simply interest on the debt. It's not money going into health care. It's not money going into social services. It's not money going into the military or to the police. It's not money going to paying anybody except for those people who hold the debt. And so it's think about how much you can do, and it's not just at the federal level; it's at the provincial levels as well. People have to start to understand how much we are actually it's costing us to spend, or how much it's costing us to actually borrow money at this level.
Yeah, and when you give this file to a completely inexperienced, like what economic background does Minister Freeland actually have? Can she run a calculator? Does she? What's her staff like? Who's on her staff? Is there anybody in the upper ranks of the federal, let's call it the federal finance department, who actually have a clue as to how an economy works, instead of coming up with these constant pipe dreams that cost us these, like the national daycare program they're talking about. They want to spend $100 billion just so that they can. The argument is always this feminist one. Well, we got to have more work space or daycare spaces so women can get into the workforce, and the workforce can be more equitable. Well, that's great, except for the fact that's not how the workforce works. As an example, if you're going to make sure that you want 50% representation of women in politics, then why not bricklaying, or why not plumbing, or why not carpentry? And the answer is most women don't want those jobs. So you cannot impose any kind of sensible, equitable program across the economy. So who are you making these child care spaces available for?
Well, and here's again, we could have a debate about the utility of a national daycare program. I'm opposed to it for a lot of reasons, not just fiscal reasons, but philosophical reasons. But wanting to have the program is not an invalid position to take, okay? Some people want it, some people don't want it. But let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that it's something that we all agree we want and that we need, and that it's a good thing. And we could take that position unanimously for the sake of argument.
All right.
Am I the only one that would raise my hand and say, yeah, but in the current fiscal situation, which is approaching a crisis level, people are talking about the COVID-19 crisis, the pandemic crisis, etc. But the real crisis out there that's waiting to break is the fiscal crisis in this country. It's a government debt crisis, okay, that's just waiting to break at the right moment. Why would we be proposing any of these utopian programs, okay, these massive national programs, even if we all agreed that they would be a good thing to have? Why would we be doing them now at this point in time? Surely somebody can stand up and say, you know what? It's a luxury that we can't afford. Maybe we all want it. Okay? But this is kind of like the Western, modern, postmodern idea about credit. We all have credit cards, so let's put it on the credit card. Not a problem. Let's not wait until we can afford it. Let's not wait until we can figure out how to pay for it. Just throw it on the credit card. We'll get around to paying the credit card off eventually. And then what do? We make minimum payments on the credit card. And then what happens? Well, once we run that credit card up, then we're starting to look for another credit card to start to run up so that we can make payments on that. And then you get into this recycling thing where you're borrowing from one credit card to pay the other credit card, etc. That's how this kind of stuff happens. And, it's a terrible example, I think, Nick, when our governments, the leaders of our country, are afraid to say to everybody, including youth, okay, we can't afford it. We'd like to do it. We maybe all agree that we should be doing it, but we can't afford it right now. Let's get our fiscal house in order, and then we'll talk about what we can afford to do and not do. Okay?
The only time I've heard that's asking for more than we have out of the Prime Minister was when that veteran stood up and said, what about us?
Yeah.
Remember that?
I do remember that, and that was peanuts. It was less than a drop in the fiscal bucket.
And then he turned around and gave $250 million to some third world despotic country so women could get abortions. Now wait a minute. If you don't have enough to look after our homeless and our injured vets, how do you justify turning around and spending that kind of money on some third world country that we will never see back? And yet turn back on the people who defend us every day.
I don't know, Nick. It's beyond me. There is one other related topic here that I think we have in the few minutes we have left in this segment that I want to touch on, and that is the whole idea of a budget. In my life, I have never seen a government at any level not produce a budget for the coming fiscal year. And if you have no budget, you have no fiscal plan. It's, the idea that they could even be talking about a national daycare program or any other program without actually producing a budget saying, okay, this is what our estimated revenue is going to be. Here is our estimated spending. We have an idea of what that's going to be. Here's how we're going to pay for it over the next a year, 2 years, 5 years, etc. To me, it's unprecedented. It's unheard of that any government that has any sense of responsibility would just go on operating like this, spending money, and not have produced a budget. I've never heard and seen of such a thing. Not in a first world country, maybe a third world country. And, somebody said the other day, we don't have a blank check. Well, then stop treating it like it's a blank check. Because that's the way they're behaving. They're behaving like it's a blank check.
Well, there's one group you can blame for this, and it isn't the Liberal government. Because this is a minority government. And when Mr. Singh took the stand and said it's terrible that we're pushing off this daycare program down the road because people need help now, I just couldn't believe he had the audacity to say that. Because what you're doing is you're inflicting another $100 million, $100 billion, a ton of money on taxpayers today. And he thought it was outrageous that we didn't do that. And supporting this government time and time and time again, that should have fallen ages ago over a whole host of different things, not all economic. But no budget, I'm sorry, that's a confidence issue. Because if you don't bring a budget, we have nothing to have any confidence in. Therefore, you're going down. And the government probably has. Go ahead.
I was going to say it's funny because you can't even vote on the budget because they're not producing a budget to vote on.
Right. So that's the next question is how do you make – I think what you do if the NDP actually stood up for what it believed, actually had a spine they would go shoulder to shoulder with the Tories and say, we will not resume our seats in the House of Commons. We will not pass any legislation. We will not support this government until such time as they bring a confidence motion in a budget to the House, and then defeat them.
Well, even then, I mean, the opposition parties are being presented, the Commons is being presented with spending bills, Nick. The government's not spending this money on its own. They're getting authorization to spend the money without the production of a budget. So in this one, as bad as I want to, I want to pin this on the Liberals, and for sure they have primary responsibility. The reality is that it's the opposition parties that are letting them get away with it. Now, granted, not the Conservatives, but certainly the NDP and the Bloc Québécois also should be voting should be refusing to authorize any spending until the government produces a budget. Absolutely.
And they could easily do it. And even if the Bloc wanted to do its own thing, without the NDP, it's still a minority, and they're going down. So they would have the NDP is in the driver's seat in the House of Commons, and as much as I love watching Pierre Poilievre tear apart Christina Freeland and the Prime Minister when he decides it's a day to actually show up and pay attention almost, that's a lot of fun to watch. But it's like raging at the ocean because of the tide. You're just not going to get anywhere. There's a story about a king who said, okay, you think I can stop the tide? Well, let's go down and find out. He sat on a chair and the tide came in. He said, don't come in. Well, he got wet. You can't stop that. So it's the idea that while the Conservatives are beating the right drum, they're beating it alone. And they need to have the NDP. And this is where I don't know what Aaron O'Toole's doing behind the scenes. Is he going to the other parties and saying, look, we got to put an end to this. We cannot afford this. Any Conservative worth his salt will be trying to build bridges with the other parties behind the scenes and come out against this because it is, you want to talk about unsustainable. We just can't continue this.
Okay, coming up here on the bottom of the hour, Nick, so we're going to go for a bit of a break. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening live, we'll be back in a few minutes. If you're listening on the podcast, we will catch you tomorrow morning or the next day, whatever that happens to be, on part 2 of episode 135, The Nick and Joe Show, here on ThinkRadio.ca.